Gonna start with a size 12 dry fly hook. I happen to be using a Fulling Mill FM5050, which is barbless. I like these because they're really sharp and sturdy, but use whatever dry fly hook you like. Starting from about 2 eye lengths behind the eye, I'm gonna start tying in my thread. For this one, I'm using a cream colored UTC 70, but again, use the thread you like, so long as it isn't too heavy or thick. Taking touching wraps, I'll stop my thread about at the bend of the hook. For the tail, I'm using some speckled Coq de Leon. The feather I show on screen has some scrunched up barbs, which I won't be using, and you definitely want some straighter fibers for this. I tore off about 8 to 10 barbs, but again, make the tail as bushy as you'd like. This video is more so a general guide to tying a style of fly than a prescriptive pattern. As I tie in this tail, I'm starting with the fibers against the hook on the side that's facing me. This is because as I cinch down on the thread, the friction will pull the fibers back up onto the top of the hook shank. Once I'm happy with the placement, I take a few wraps under the tail so that it stays propped up and flush with the hook shank. Snip off the excess and take thread wraps to make a smooth body. You'll notice I take my time and inspect all angles of the fly. I like to catch my mistakes sooner rather than later, and you'll see I definitely make mistakes on this one. This looks good to me here, so I'm going to take wraps up and down until the thread base is smooth. I stop my thread about 3 eye lengths or so behind the eye, which is where I want my wings. If you want a larger head, you can scooch it back, or if you want hardly a head at all, then you can tie your wings in closer to the eye. I prepped a mallard flank feather by snipping off about 1 centimeter's worth of barbs from the tip, but only cutting at the stem and not trimming any fibers. Then I folded over the 2 halves of the feather and aligned the barbs by pulling forward the fibers that were just short of the others. Pinching down with my non-dominant hand, I'm measuring out about a hook shank's length for these wings. You can see me struggle a bit here tying the wings in. Definitely use a pinch wrap and don't release the grip on the wings until you're certain the wraps have the wings down tight. I kept this part in because realistically it'll happen to many of us from time to time, even on patterns we're comfortable tying. You can always back up and redo prior steps, so no need to rush or proceed with something you're unhappy with. Anyways, once I'm happy with the wings, I take a few wraps behind. Then, while pulling the wing fibers up, I take a few thread wraps in front of them, trying to form a nice thread dam right in front of the wings. All the while, I'm pausing and inspecting the wings to make sure that they're in the right length and sitting upright. Once the wings look good, I'll snip off the waist, making sure to angle my scissors upwards so that the leftover material is thicker closer to the middle of the fly. That way, when I wrap over the waist material, it'll give me a head start on forming the taper. Take wraps back and forth until the abdomen has a smooth taper up to the wings. You can see the wings weren't staying as perpendicular to the fly as I had hoped, so I took a few more wraps in front of the wings to better support them. For this next part, I don't want my thread to be too wide, so I spin my bobbin counterclockwise to cord up the strands a bit. Divide up the wing fibers so you get about half of them for each wing. They're going to form a V shape since this pattern is representing a mayfly in its done stage. I'll futz with this a bit because I want it to look just right. When they're about even, take cross wraps with your thread to splay the wings out. It's a little tricky, so take your time, keep even pressure on your thread, and rotate your vise as needed to get the right angle. I don't want the wings to fan out too much, so I take some figure 8 wraps around the base of the wing fibers, crisscrossing around and over the hook shank as well. This is particularly tricky, and I've found that it helps to keep your thread consistently taut. Once you're happy with the wings, trim any errant fibers and work the thread back to the tail. For the abdomen, I'm using a stripped peacock herl specifically from an eye section rather than a sword. The stem of the herls in the eye sections have much more gradated colors, while the herls in the sword have stems that are just consistently dark. After stripping off the fibers, I trimmed off the thinner section so that my herl wraps will give the body a wide enough segmentation from the very first turn. When I tie in the herl, I make sure to note which direction it's facing. If it's light on the left and dark on the right, I want to preserve that orientation on every turn. Take wraps up to behind the wings, making sure to trim any excess peacock stem as necessary. I like Hackle pliers, so I'll use them at this point. Before I take wraps forward, I'll put a small bead or so of head cement on the thread so that the peacock wraps will stay in place. Then carefully and deliberately, I take wraps forward, trying to keep the light and dark parts of the herl stem even. Don't rush this, or you could easily break the stem or create uneven segmentation. You'll see in a bit that I make a mistake right near the end of the abdomen. I kept this in because, again, we all make mistakes, and I want to show you one way you can recover a gaffe at this stage of the fly. So it was looking good right up until the end, and I unfurled the peacock just a bit too much and snapped off the stem while tying down. I had some wing fibers trapped, and while freeing them I messed up the peacock. At this point, I decided to trim off the excess peacock stem and just tie in a new herl stem, with about the same thickness as the section I left off on. Again, make sure to have the light and dark parts lined up correctly. This won't be an Instagram-worthy tie, but by fixing it this way, I'll be able to finish it and get a very fishable fly that I already put quite some effort into. Again, using Hackle pliers, I'll take the remaining wraps needed to finish the abdomen and tie off the herl. For the hackle, I'm using grizzly rooster with the barbules about the width of the hook gape. I stripped the fibers from about 1/8 inch of the stem. Then, with the feather's shiny side facing me, I stripped off a couple inches of the top fibers only so that I can get nice clean turns around the hook shank. Tie in the hackle with the shiny side again still facing you, and the stem against the side of the hook facing you as well. Take wraps forward and end with your tying thread behind the eye. Wrap the hackle around the hook shank with the barbless stem side touching the hook and touching each wrap against the previous one. As you get closer to the wings, you may have to preen them forward as to not catch in the mallard fibers. Then, as you wrap the grizzly hackle forward, you can preen the mallard fibers back again so that you get nice clean turns in front of the wings. After 3 or so turns in front of the wings, take a few thread wraps around the hackle to bind it in place. Carefully trim the rooster hackle, making sure not to cut your tying thread. I've done that several times, and it can be utterly demoralizing to make that mistake so close to the finish line. At this point, you can whip finish and cut away any stray fibers. I like to finish with the fly upside down because the eye is bent and that helps me avoid crowding it. Alright, there you have it, the Catskills Style Dry Fly. It's not perfect, but I've caught plenty of fish on worse looking flies. Feel free to swap out the colors and materials and let me know what you think in the comments.